Good afternoon. We'll get started in just a moment. As people enter the webinar, presenters prepare for our new webinar. And start screen sharing. We'll introduce the topic, and then if you're comfortable, we can get started.
Yep, let me just share that.
Oh. So welcome. My name is Summer Rothrock, serve as the parent and family liaison. I use she, her pronouns, and I am excited to welcome you today to a collaborative webinar with our colleagues in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. This is a two-part series of webinars. So this is the first part. The second part was included on our same flyers and information, and I will put the registration for the second part in the chat in just a moment. This webinar is about discussing healthy relationships. It is specifically for our parents, families, and support systems. So we're excited to have you if you're able to join us live. Otherwise, we are also recording this session. If you have questions for the presenters along the way, please put them into the Q&A feature. And I will share in the chat the link if you would like to register for the second webinar in our series. And I'm going to turn it over to Dev to get us started for our hour together.
Thank you so much, Summer. Hello, everybody. Whether you're joining us live or you're joining us later on in the recording, my name is Dev Hayosek. I prefer that you just use my name, but also they, he pronouns are fine. I'm joined in the same office with my coworker, and I will let Carrie introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Director of Prevention and Education here at Pitt. Thanks for being here.
And I serve as the lead prevention educator working alongside Carrie on the prevention team. And what we're really here today to do is have an open conversation about what it's, how we discuss healthy relationships with our students, with each other, to give you some skills and some preparation to be able to talk with your young people as they navigate their first, year at the university away from home. So there is an interactive portion. Feel free to interact either in the chat or with the Q&A. And then for folks that are joining later on in the recorded version, feel free to use those moments of interaction for your own self-reflection or journaling, or if you're watching this with a fellow parent or a group of people, feel free to have your own conversations. There's no pressure. We're here to learn in whatever way feels best. So our first question that we have for you all today, oops, let me navigate the right PowerPoint here, is what did the education you receive as a young adult around healthy relationships and sexuality look like? Did you receive any sex ed or any healthy relationships education? Or, did you learn through parents? So what did that look like? And I'll give some time to interact with the chat. I can see the chat.
Okay.
It's the PowerPoint.
See anything coming in on the chat? Trying to figure out how to pull it up here.
Mike, do you see anything in the chat?
This is Summer. No, I have the chat open. Nothing coming in.
Well, as we think about this question, I can share from my experience that growing up, I had very limited education in terms of sexuality, in terms of classic sex ed.
Here.
1 second.
This should let us be.
So I know that I did not have a traditional, sex ed that was very much comprehensive other than the basics. And certainly there were not opportunities before I came to university to have conversations about what healthy relationships look like. I was kind of left for, just to learn through either TV or media or the books that I was consuming. It was like kind of a taboo topic in our house to talk about things, feelings or emotions. So I didn't have many conversations with my parents. So I certainly came to my university years with very limited knowledge and not so much of a normalization of talking about these things. And a lot of my friends also did not have the skills. So we weren't really having conversations either. What about you, Carrie?
Yeah, I want to just point out too, it looks like the chat has been enabled. So feel free to drop some information whenever you feel comfortable in that chat. But yeah, I had some education around healthy relationships and healthy sexuality when I was in high school. It wasn't super in depth, but it did exist. And this is a question that we ask a lot of our students here at Pitt when we're engaging with them, as we start to talk with them about things like consent and boundaries, right? Just getting them to think a little bit about where have they gathered information. And what we typically find is about a third of the room shares that they've received really great information where they've talked about boundaries, they've talked about what feels good and what doesn't feel good in a relationship, that they've talked a lot about consent. About another third of the group has had, maybe a seminar or two on these topics. And then another third has maybe never in their life had a formal conversation around healthy relationships or healthy sexuality. So they've never given themselves space to think about what does a healthy relationship look like, feel like for them. And so Dev and I are really passionate about making sure that people know that they have the right to take some space to think about what feels good for them, what doesn't, to think about their boundaries, and then to really engage in how do we have conversations openly to discuss what those boundaries are. And a lot of the ways that we do that, recognizing that everybody is coming in with different experiences, different knowledge, is to build a common language. And so we'll do a little bit of that with this group today too.
So thinking of our next question, really in the preparation for these conversations, trying to get you to think about, can you think of a time that you've had an uncomfortable conversation, whether it was, with a parent yourself or with a coworker at work or a friend, or maybe a romantic partner, a spouse, sibling, any conversation that was, a little bit uncomfortable? And what are some of the things that stand out as successes, or what are some of the things that you would improve upon? We're going to talk in a slide or two about how this communication is a skill that we have to practice and continue to practice. So we're always learning from our interactions. So if anybody wants to put in the chat, what are some things that you've learned from having an uncomfortable conversation? Some things that went well, or maybe things that didn't go as well that you would have liked to change? And again, for folks that are watching this in the recorded version, feel free to take some time, jot some things down on paper, or if you're watching this with anybody else, have a conversation between you all.
I'm looking at the chat, I'm not seeing anything come through yet. Continue.
Right. So why is this important? Why are we here for this training? We know, this is your slide.
Yeah, it's okay. So, one of the reasons that Deb and I do this work around getting folks to talk about healthy relationships and healthy sexuality is because we know that too often the young people on our campus have experienced or may experience some form of sexual misconduct, whether that be sexual harassment, sexual violence, stalking, or any form of sexual harassment. So let's talk through a little bit about what some of the stats look like around this issue. We don't share this information to scare people, but really we think it's information that can be empowering, right? The more that we understand what the climate of campus sexual misconduct can look like, both here at Pitt and at every college campus across the country, the more we can do to actively engage with our campus and with our students to make sure that they have the skills and the knowledge that they need to navigate relationships in a safe way. And that's why we're so glad that you're going to be here today, learning how to have these conversations so that it's another touch point that our students can really rely on, right? So what we know is that intimate partner violence impacts more than 12 million people a year. And we know that when we think about sexual misconduct as a whole and look at some national statistics, that about 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will experience some form of violence or abuse by an intimate partner in their lifetime, right? That's a pretty substantial amount of our population. We also know that many of our teens who are coming into campuses, so thinking about this as a national statistic, about 1 in 3 of our female identifying teens have reported experiences with some form of teen dating violence before they come to a university, right? So they're already coming in with experiences with trauma. And so it's really important that we're providing space to be thinking about what do relationships look like, what feels good, what doesn't. We know that our trans and non-binary students are experiencing very high rates of intimate partner violence. About 1 in 3 adolescents, again, have experienced some form of trauma or abuse with a partner before they even get here. And here at Pitt, we know about 10% of students in 2019 who filled out our climate survey who experienced, about 10% of our students who filled out this survey reported experiences with sexual or intimate partner-based violence during their time at the university. So this topic is really important that we're talking about. It's really important that all of us are engaged in this work, students, staff, faculty, and you as supporters, that we're all doing everything that we can to ensure that students and all of us have the skills that we need to navigate relationships as safely as possible.
So how can we help? Number one reasons why victims or survivors do not reach out for support is because of the shame and stigma that's attached to talking about things like relationship violence, or sexuality or sex or any of those topics. And by normalizing these conversations, whether it be at home or with our friends or with our colleagues at work, we create a culture that it makes it open to talk about things that are maybe a little bit more difficult. And it gives us the skills to be able to hold those conversations. The more we talk about things, the less power we give to stigma and shame, and bring light to those topics and normalize being able to be open and be vulnerable. So the number one way that we can show you how to help today is the framework that we've put together for you for discussing healthy relationships. So just a quick guide. If you take a picture of this slide, or I'm sure we'll have the slides available to send out so you can have this for reference. But the first part, step 1, is really humanizing that process. Like I said, there is a lot of stigma and shame that is surrounded by talking about abuse or domestic violence or sexual violence. And even in some communities, just talking about relationships. We've come a long way, but for our LGBTQIA students, it still could be very hard to talk about their relationships if they don't feel safe or they feel like they may be outed. So we really want to humanize the process of communicating with each other about things that may be difficult. We are all human. We are all imperfect. We're not always going to get it right. But the point is that we try and that we learn as we go, and we learn from the times that we're not, maybe not hitting the mark. And we also recognize the times that we are hitting the mark and things that do work. We check in with ourselves before we enter the conversation. What do we need? If I'm going in to have a difficult conversation with, whether it be a colleague or with one of my parents, what do I need to make sure that I can show up as best as I can? Maybe it's I need to make sure I have water. So I'm drinking water. It gives me something to do whenever I'm feeling uncomfortable. Maybe it's I need to make sure that, it's on my terms and not necessarily like we're in, a space that I feel comfortable with. However, you need to check in with yourself and making sure that you're ready, taking some deep breaths, kind of taking a moment to center yourself. so that you're going in with the best possible mindset to have a difficult conversation, or even just a conversation that doesn't feel difficult, but might just, be a little bit uncomfortable, or maybe request some vulnerability. The second step of having, of discussing relationships or having any kind of difficult conversation is maybe setting some ground rules, especially as a family. If we're going to talk about something as a family, what are some of the ways that we maybe want to interact with each other to ensure that the conversation stays safe for everybody? So maybe that's, setting some rules of, we're going to use I statements. We're going to speak from our perspective. We're going to make sure we're not generalizing or trying to lump experiences together. Maybe it's active listening or listening with intent. We're not necessarily waiting to respond, or you're trying to jump in with a response right away, but instead we're just listening, and we're taking in the information that we're being given, and we're waiting to respond. And maybe it's a rule of thumb that we don't use harsh language. We want to be making sure that we're, keeping the language calm, and that we're checking in with ourselves. Because again, going back to the stigma piece, it's very easy when we get emotional, or if we get, uncomfortable, to want to kind of fall into, a different kind of language, maybe a little bit more harsh, and that adds to the stigma, and may make, the person you're having a discussion with less willing to engage. Sorry, I do realize now that we do have slides on each. Here I am going through. And I think, yeah, I finished all of that. So just really remembering, how do we want to interact and these don't have to be, necessarily for just a family. Maybe this is your ground rules of how you want to have a conversation with folks, and some of the boundaries that you think of, that you set for yourself.
Want to make sure that we're using open-ended discussions when we're talking. So if we've entered in a space where you and your student both are aware that you're going to be talking about relationships or healthy sexuality, how you have that discussion is going to be really important, right? So when you think about any kind of discussion that we may have, if you think about, even picking up a student or a child from school when they're young, if you say, "How is school?" you get usually a good, and it's pretty quiet. The same thing can happen when we're having conversations about really important but sometimes difficult to discuss conversations. And so even taking, for example, did you like the movie? That's a closed-ended question, right? There's really just a couple answers to that question that really stand out. Yes, no, it was okay, right? But if we ask that question in a different way, we're going to get different types of responses, right? So what was your favorite part of the movie? Well, I really liked the middle when this happened. Oh, really? Why? Right? Now we're starting a conversation. Well, we're allowing students to start to really engage with us, to have a more in-depth conversation that we can then kind of play on. Oh, I liked that part too, and this is why. So when we think about talking about healthy relationships, we want to lead with those open-ended questions. What does a healthy relationship look like for you? When you think about your own life, are there models of healthy relationships? What does that look like? And then if they give a response, thinking about how you can build on that with somebody, right? So you've now created that safe space, you've created some ground rules, and now you're entering into a place where you can provide open-ended questions so you can really start a discussion around this topic. One thing that I find really helpful when having conversations is that sometimes we can draw from things that we're seeing in the media, TV shows, movies that maybe we know that we've both watched. It can be really helpful to talk about, hey, this relationship in this particular show that we're watching together, like, what do you think about that? Sometimes that can be a good starting off place rather than talking about examples from our own lives. If that feels comfortable for you, that's great. But sometimes it's easier to bring in something that's a little bit more neutral, like talking about things that we're seeing in TV, in media, when we're having conversations around healthy relationships.
So for folks that are with us live, or if you're watching this in the recorded, let's take, a few minutes to think about our relationships. And, you can do this at home. You can do it really at any point, and think about listing 3 of the things that are important to you in a relationship. Is it good communication? Is it straightforward communication? Is it, the freedom to be able to express your emotions and feel that it's a safe space? Is it, what are the things that really make a good relationship for you? And then also on the flip side of that, what are 3 aspects or occurrences or situations in a relationship that you find hurtful? Maybe not being honest, if someone's not honest with you, or maybe when folks are too honest and they're kind of too straightforward, and that could be hurtful. So really giving ourselves permission to think about the things that we like and don't like about relationships, because when we know what we like and don't like, we are able to talk to our peers, our young people that are at university, our coworkers, about the things that maybe they like or don't like, and also give the opportunity to share some of the things. We might not know, like, oh, I didn't even realize that I, would prefer if somebody talked to me this way versus this way, or I didn't realize how much I don't appreciate, when folks are too honest with me and don't kind of like give me some sort of positive feedback. So really giving ourselves, if anybody has, wants to put in the chat right now of some of the things that are important to you in a relationship, feel free. But certainly definitely think about these things as we move along in your life. And these are perfect questions to ask with your young people too. When you're checking in with their relationships, asking them, like, what are 3 things that you like about your current partner or your friends that you're seeing, that you're spending more time with?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, that as we're talking about healthy relationships, certainly our focus is on preventing all forms of relationship violence, right? But these are really great transferable skills that we can also use to check in with someone about all relationships in their life, right? We want to make sure that every person that our student or child may be interacting with is someone that is contributing to their success. And so being able to have hard conversations around friendships or experiences that maybe they're having in the classroom can be really important. We can use these same skills. I frequently share that one of the reasons that I got into this work is that when I was in college, I was in a pretty unhealthy relationship. I never once took time during that entire relationship to think about what I wanted. What were my boundaries? What felt good? What wasn't feeling good in that space? I don't think it was until I was far out of college, maybe in my mid-20s, before I, for the first time, started to think a little bit about what feels right for me. What are my boundaries? Realizing that I had the right to set those parameters for my relationships. And so we want to encourage our students to know that they have the right to feel comfortable in every relationship that they have, right? And so an easy way to start that conversation is simply asking them, what are 3 things that are important to you in a relationship? As Deb mentioned, what are 3 things that you really like about this current partner? I don't know much about them. You've met them at Pitt. Tell me a little bit about that. So those are easy ways to get that conversation flowing, and we're using those open-ended questions.
Yeah, that's a really good point about, this is really the open-ended part of, instead of the, do you like this person? Yes or no, we're asking for more information of what do you like about them, and giving them the opportunity to share that. So of course, as we go along, when we're talking about preventing any kind of sexual misconduct or relationship violence on campus, it is important that we have some common language and that we have, some understanding of what these different things mean. So just some definitions for you. When we're talking about sexual misconduct, we use that as a blanket statement that encompasses a couple different forms of violence. One being a sexual assault, which is defined as any sexual act directed against another person without consent of the victim, including instances where the victim is incapable of giving consent. We are also talking about dating violence or intimate partner violence, or domestic violence, as it's sometimes referred to as well, which is defined as violence committed by a person who is or has been in a social relationship of a romantic or intimate nature with the victim. Dating violence includes, but is not limited to, sexual or physical abuse or the threat of such abuse. We also are talking about stalking. So stalking is defined as engaging in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or suffer substantial emotional stress. And when we look at stalking, really that can take two forms. It could be physical, physically stalking someone, following someone, showing up at their classes or their dates with their friends, or online. The online world can really open up the opportunities for someone to, track location or, constantly be trying to communicate with someone via a social media app. And we want to emphasize that, for our young people at the university, that 90% of the violence that has been experienced by a student on our campus has been within a relationship, whether it be an intimate partner or a romantic partner. So we really want to make sure that we have these definitions to be able to talk with our young people about. And also we know that oftentimes when there is an instance of violence, that our young people are not, they're not disclosing it because they might not even know that what they've experienced is a form of violence.
Yeah, so it's a really important reason why we as supporters have some common language around these terms, so that we know that if somebody is coming to us and they're sharing an experience, it doesn't mean that we have to say, oh my goodness, like what you're describing to me is XYZ, that doesn't feel comfortable for you, but it does empower you to have the ability to say, that should not have happened to you. I'm so sorry you experienced that. How can I help you get the support that you need, right? If you feel comfortable engaging in that deeper conversation, that's great. But at the bare minimum, we want to be able to confirm with someone that that shouldn't have happened. And there is support and there's help available.
So something that we often talk with our students about when we're giving trainings on talking about healthy relationships is consent. Consent is such a huge thing that we teach young people because it's the most important thing about interacting in our relationships, that everything is consensual. We break down consent in a way that's pretty easy to remember and often, brings a little bit more levity into it, the acronym FRIES. So when we talk about consent, which is actively agreeing to engage in a sexual activity with another person, consent is never implied, regardless of relationship status or previous sexual relationship, and consent is not permanent. It can be withdrawn at any time. So when we talk about consent through the FRIES framework, consent is F, freely given, R, reversible. So as we said, it is not permanent and it can be withdrawn at any time. And consent for an act on one instance is not consent for an act on all instances. Consent is informed, so we know what we're getting ourselves into. I often use the example of when we go to a medical provider and we have some sort of procedure done, we have to sign a form that says we understand what we're letting the physician do to us, whether it be a surgery or an exam. The same thing here. If I'm consenting to an act, whether it be a sexual act or some other activity, I need to know what I'm getting myself into because I may consent to one thing, but not everything. E, enthusiastic. We really want that yes, not a yes that we coerce somebody into giving, or not a yes if, they're unable to provide consent, if they're under the influence, if they're, not able to give that straightforward yes. And specific. We want it to be specific to what am I consenting to? Again, that informed decision, knowing that this is, when I'm saying yes, I know exactly what I'm saying yes to, and I'm able to explicitly say that yes, this is what I want to do. Anything that you want to add?
To say we always really emphasize that enthusiasm is huge, right? We want consent to be free of any kind of pressure or coercion. And that pressure can be something as intense as a physical threat of violence. And it can be something that it's asking for sex or something in a relationship multiple times, really pressuring somebody to engage in a certain way, right? No matter what that looks like on that continuum, all forms of sexual activity should be free of any kind of pressure. And so we always encourage students to be thinking about enthusiasm. If we are not 100% sure that somebody is excited to engage in this way with us, with their partner, right? We want to stop and check in and figure out why.
All right. So one of one of the ways we like to engage with this material is practicing giving scenarios. So again, for folks that are with us live, we're going to read the scenario to you, and feel free to check in through the chat. But for folks at home, again, feel free to check in with yourself with the scenario, take some notes, maybe discuss this with a partner or with, a group of your friends that all have young people at the university or at the various universities. So the scenario for your young person has been at Pitt for a few months. You've noticed that your young person has not been communicating with you much. They aren't calling home for their regular phone calls, and their texts are brief and inconsistent. You do know that they have been talking to someone. However, the details of this relationship are unclear. You've noticed that they're not posting about their friends as much on social media, and when they are home for winter break, they are irritable, anxious, and constantly texting. You want to check in with their relationship, but where do you start?
So let's pull back up the continuum, and folks who are in the room, please feel free to use the chat, but maybe Deb and I, we can go ahead and give an example of what, how we can engage in that conversation. So we're going to bring up our framework here. All right. So Deb, would you like to be our parent or supporter today?
Sure.
All right. And I'll be the student. So let's walk through this together.
Sure. So, when looking at step one, I want to humanize the situation. So, hi, Carrie. I noticed that, our conversations through text have been a little bit, inconsistent. And I've noticed that since you've been home for winter break that you've been a little down and something, it's a little off. Is there something that you wanted to talk about? I know that you've been seeing this new person and we don't know much about them. So I wanted to check in and see how everything's going. And, are you missing them, or, have you been talking to them on break? Or I just wanted to really check in with you and see how it's going.
Yeah, so right here, Deb has worked to humanize that experience. So being straightforward about what you're seeing or what you're concerned about. No, if you are just having a general conversation, it might be coming from a different lens of, hey, I want to talk to you about something that's really important because I care about you, right? But Deb is sharing why Deb is very concerned about me. So if I choose to engage, like, thanks so much for bringing this up. There's some things that I want to talk to you about.
So then we move on to step two. So, if I were, the parent or support in the situation, I would definitely remind my young person that, great, I'm glad that you feel comfortable coming to me, and I want to have this conversation with you. And I want you to know that at any point, if you feel uncomfortable or you want us to take a break or you need to step away, I'm here for that. We're here. I want you to take this as at your pace, and I want you to feel safe and comfortable to come to me. So I'm setting those ground rules. And I may ask, like, is there anything that you need from me? Is there anything that you want me to honor while we're having this conversation? Do we need to go into a different room? Like, maybe this conversation's happening in the kitchen. It starts in the kitchen, and maybe they would feel more comfortable if we went into the family room, or, a different room that's, that other people may not be able to hear the conversation or walk into it.
So my response might be something like, I do want to talk to you about this, but when I was in high school, I tried talking to you about some of this, and I always felt you were really judgy. So it makes me hesitant to want to engage now.
So again, owning up to that, I would say something like, I'm really sorry that you felt that way and that I made you feel that way. And, I want you to know that I'm here with no judgment. I want to listen, and I want to help, and I want to support. And, I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that I'm not making you feel that way. Or, another situation is maybe I need to take a beat. Maybe I need to say, like, wow, I really acknowledge that. And, give me a second to really check in with myself and make sure that, I'm showing up in the way that makes that I can support you the best. Because remember, this isn't a perfect process, and it may feel a little clunky. It may feel, a little uncomfortable, but we want to make sure that we're attempting to show up the best we can. And if our young person is brave enough to give us that feedback, being able to take that and sit with that for a moment to honor that is a really good thing.
Yep. And in that ground rules, really asking them, I'm sorry that you had that experience previously with me. What do we need to do to make sure that we don't repeat that? So what are some things that I can do to make sure that you feel comfortable? And listen, this can be really challenging. somebody's former partner in this particular situation may have been someone that you were really concerned about. And so getting that kind of feedback can be really hard. And it doesn't mean that you want to just cast those feelings or those concerns aside, but it does mean that we want to carefully navigate that situation so that we're able to continue to engage in making sure that that person is in a healthy and safe relationship now. So we don't want to let any past experiences or past conflict influence our ability to make sure that somebody is immediately in a safe and healthy relationship.
Mhm.
So we've decided to engage in the conversation. So now let's model some open-ended questions.
Yeah, so I may start off, with just a general open question of, so what's going on? What is it that you want to talk about? What's on your mind?
Well, I started dating this person at the beginning of the year, and September was great. Then October, I didn't see them at all. I don't know what happened. And then in November, they just showed back up. And when we're together, we have the best time, but frequently they just kind of disappear. And I don't know what to do about that.
So well, first of all, where did you meet? How did you meet them?
Yeah, see, now Dev is using some open-ended questions, right? And isn't necessarily just jumping into the hard stuff, but is giving some questions that might be a little bit easier to ease our way in, right? How did you meet this person? Dev did not respond in a way that was judgmental, right? So having that open line of communication and then using those open-ended questions to kind of build that conversation.
Yeah, because remembering earlier from the response that I got about the judgment, I want to make sure that even though I maybe as the parent or supporter already see some red flags of, oh, there's some inconsistent communication, I could already start putting my judgment on it. But I want my young person to know that I just want to know more about this relationship. Maybe their partner just really is a kind of a more freer person and doesn't want to, have strict communication, or I'm not painting a picture until there's details given to me to paint with.
And so if I have now disclosed some information that maybe is concerning to Dev, and we've closed the conversation, we want to make sure that we're thinking about what that follow-up looks like, right? And that's checking in with your young person. So Dev, if you want to go ahead and just demonstrate what that can look like.
Yeah, so I would probably and I'm really role playing here because I don't have any kids, but I would definitely before going back to the university, wherever they're going back to at the end of break, I would check in, maybe something as simple of, I'm really glad that we had that conversation a couple days ago, and I just want you to know that we are here to support you. I'm here to support you. We're going to go over in the next slides about the supports that are available at the university. So I would probably, remind them of that. And then I would, once they get back to school, maybe in a week or two, I would check back in, send a text if that's how you usually communicate, or if you do communicate more by phone or social media, however your, normal mode of communication, I would check in, hey, I wanted to know how things with so-and-so are going. Have you had that conversation? Did you, reach out to, if there's a situation where there is some, violence involved, did you reach out to the resources that we talked about? And really just giving that follow-up, letting them know that I'm still here, I'm not judging them. And what I want is for them to do what's best and for them to have, a safe and healthy learning environment.
Yeah. So we talked about this specifically with an example of talking about an active relationship, but this framework, again, can be used excuse me, to talk about any topic around healthy relationships, consent, sexual violence, right? It's humanizing the process, setting those ground rules, asking open questions, and then doing the follow-up. And I would also just be checking in throughout all of these different steps. If the conversation is starting to move into a place that is not productive, recognize that. Recognize and be able to state, we've seemed to have come to a wall right now. And I'm so glad we started this conversation. I'm so glad we're talking together, but maybe we need to take a quick break and either come back now, or maybe we need a little time, right? So it's okay to recognize that maybe a conversation has hit a spot where you're not being productive in that conversation, that maybe you have different opinions, that maybe your concerns about what's being shared are eliciting an emotional reaction that your student or child is not responding well to, right? We want to recognize that and take a break. That's okay. We're human, and when we're talking about somebody that's a child or someone that we're supporting, these are really complicated relationships. I do have 2 children, and I know that they are, the most important thing in my life. And so when I'm concerned that they're making decisions that could be hurtful to them, it's hard to take a backseat. It's hard to take a minute to breathe and to listen to what they're saying. And so if you're feeling that, that's okay. It's normal. Just take a minute and then regroup and come back to the conversation at a time where it feels safe for everyone.
Take us to her. So again, another scenario. This time we're talking about supporting their friends. Because not only are they having experiences at college away from home, they're also meeting friends that are having their own experiences, and they, are getting looped into those experiences because they care about their friends. So in this situation, your young person calls you to express that they think something bad has happened to one of their friends. They tell you that their friend went to a party with some mutual friends and got drunk for the first time after a few members of the group pressured them into drinking. They tell you that their friend spent the night in someone else's room and has been acting strange ever since. They want to be supportive, but they don't want to be overbearing or disrespectful to their friend's privacy. How can we best support this young person in supporting their friend? So if we take ourselves back to the framework, we can walk through this. Humanizing that process again, thanking them. I'm so glad you feel comfortable to talk to me about this. And, maybe that's a friend that you also know. I care about that person as well. And I want to make sure that we're getting them the support that they need. And really, giving your young person the credit for, thank you so much for caring and, wanting to help them. And then, this looks a little bit different in terms of the ground rules, because the conversation isn't as personal, because it's not necessarily the violence isn't happening to your young person. So it may be a little bit easier to set these ground rules of, what all do we want to accomplish? Do we want to take action together today? Or are we just going to kind of talk about some scenarios or ways that maybe we would interact? What are we hoping to get out of the conversation? And then those open-ended questions, asking for those details, who are these friends that your friend went to the party with? Are you friends with them? Do you know them? Tell me a little bit about what the party was like, or, tell me a little bit about your interactions with your friend, like trying to get those details from your young person so you can determine how to best support them and which advice and which route to go in supporting them. And then of course the follow-up. Checking in with them, did your friend get support? How are you feeling? Did you get support? Because the other thing about the situation is, though it's not happening directly to our young person, they are involved because their friend is involved, and this may impact them pretty significantly. So we want to make sure that they're also getting the support, and that we're really emphasizing that we're here for them too, and that they can continue to come to us should they experience something similar, or should their friend continue to experience a relationship that's unhealthy.
I think especially in these types of conversations, where this particular setting involves a party with alcohol, that we want to be really thoughtful about how we manage that. We might be really unhappy that our child or the person that we were supporting was at a party with alcohol, but we want to try as best we can to separate those conversations. So here, your student is concerned that their friend has experienced sexual misconduct of some kind, right? We want to keep focused on that particular area and make sure that we are getting them the tools and the information that they need to best support their friend. It doesn't mean that you can't also talk to them at another time about your concerns, right? We want to separate those out so that that person doesn't shut down. If we immediately start those questions of why were you there? We've talked about this, you shouldn't be at a party with alcohol, right? It could very much shut them down from being willing to talk to you about what their roommate is experiencing. So maybe having a time a couple days later to say, Deb, in your story, which I'm really glad you shared with me. I'm really glad we were able to talk about your roommate and help that person get support. You mentioned you were at a party with alcohol. I want to talk a little bit about that, right? And so we want to try to shift to kind of separate those issues so that we're not seeing a student shut down and not give us additional information about what they need help with. So let's talk a little bit about what does it look like to support a survivor of sexual violence. So in this particular scenario, there was concern that a roommate had experienced some form of sexual misconduct after they were at a party drinking alcohol, right? And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we first start with comments and projecting that we really care. Something as simple as, I believe you. I believe what your roommate is saying. I understand how that must have felt really hard. Thank you for sharing that with me. But making sure somebody knows that we believe them, that they are heard is really important. So if we are directly working with a survivor of sexual violence or a victim of sexual violence, starting with something as simple as saying, I believe you, can be really empowering. If we're giving advice to our child who might be working with a roommate, we can let them know it's really important for your roommate to feel supported. So make sure that they know that you're here to listen and that you believe and care for them. We want to listen. We want to listen empathically, and this is really something that's kind of been woven through this entire conversation, is that when we're thinking about having these difficult conversations, listening is key. We don't want to ask a ton of questions for information that we don't need to know, right? So if somebody's coming to us and sharing that they've had an experience they're uncomfortable with, right, we want to listen. Whatever feels right for them to share with us, that's the right information for them to share in that moment. They may come back and share additional information with you, but we want to really focus in on what they feel comfortable sharing with us in that moment, right? Even if that young person is supporting a roommate, we, again, really want to focus on listening to what the needs are of your student, of your child, and then focusing on the needs of that roommate. We want to provide resources. Here at Pitt, there are a lot of resources that are available to folks who've been impacted by sexual violence. And I say impact very intentionally. We have resources for folks who may be survivors or victims of sexual misconduct. We also have resources that are available to folks who are supporting survivors of sexual violence. So if your child maybe has a roommate who's experienced an unhealthy relationship, an abusive relationship, and they're helping them through that process, that can be a lot to manage. It's a really important role that we play, but it can be a challenging role to play. So knowing that they can also access resources, and some of the resources, we can actually click to that next slide, include confidential resources like our University Counseling Center. Our University Counseling Center has a 24/7 helpline that students can call. So in any situation, if a student is calling and they're in a crisis or they're feeling very stressed about something, reminding them that they can call that 24/7 helpline by the University Counseling Center. They also have walk-in hours during business hours. So Monday through Friday during normal business hours, the Counseling Center has walk-in hours. So anyone can walk in to talk with a clinician in real time. And that clinician will do some grounding work with them to make sure that they're safe in that moment. And then also work to think about what is the best plan for that student moving forward, right? Outside of University of Pittsburgh resources, we have a wonderful rape crisis center called Pittsburgh Action Against Rape in Pittsburgh. And PAR works with anyone who's been impacted by sexual violence. They also have a 24/7 helpline. They have advocates that can work with somebody through any part of their healing process. Maybe it's learning how to do some deep breathing exercises. Maybe it's learning about different resources that are available to them. And then an advocate from PAR can actually directly connect them to those resources. It can also be advocates that are working with them through a Title IX process. If someone chooses to report something formally to the university or to the police, an advocate from PAR can work with them, can attend every meeting with that person. So there's a wide variety of different services that they offer. What's really important for you to know as a parent or supporter is that PAR is on campus every Wednesday from 9:30 to 4 o'clock. So students can come to the 18th floor of the Cathedral of Learning, which is our Office for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and request to talk to a PAR advocate. That PAR advocate is confidential and can provide support and care to your student. We also have the Women's Center and Shelter of Greater Pittsburgh here in Pittsburgh. They have a bit of a historical name. They work with folks across all genders, and they really work with folks who have experienced any form of intimate partner violence. And so when we think about the Women's Center and Shelter, they offer free and confidential counseling. They have that 24/7 helpline, and they also have a shelter attached to their organization. And finally, Resolve Crisis Services is a partnership with UPMC, and Resolve can respond to any mental health crisis in Allegheny County. So if somebody is concerned about another person, if they themselves are in crisis, they can call Resolve to talk with a clinician. Resolve also has a mobile unit, so they can come out and evaluate someone if there is a concern that has been presented to them over their helpline. And finally, Vanessa's going to be here next week to talk about the Office for Civil Rights in Title IX, which is going to talk more about how to formally report concerns and what the investigation process looks like if someone is moving through a Title IX process. But they also provide really great support services like accommodations. So if somebody is having a hard time engaging in the academic environment because of an experience with sexual misconduct, the Office for Civil Rights in Title IX can do things like providing academic accommodations, looking into housing if there's a housing concern, putting no contact orders in place, which tells two members of the university community they cannot have contact with one another. And I hope that you'll tune in next week to learn a little bit more about the work that Vanessa and her team is doing on campus around this issue. But the biggest thing is to let somebody know that there is support for them, that no one has to engage in these experiences alone, and they can engage with that support however it feels right for them. And that can be another really important piece of engaging in conversations around healthy relationships. Even if a problem hasn't come up, even if there hasn't been a flag, it's a great thing to say to your student, hey Deb, just so you know, I did a little bit of research. Do you know you have a counseling center with walk-in hours during business hours? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of ways that we can also bring that information into the conversation, normalizes getting help.
Yeah, normalizing it's so important because you may never know when they need access to a resource, and just by you bringing it up and them knowing like, oh, it's okay if I go to the counseling center. You know, my parents want me to go to the counseling center. It's good to normalize that. I think this is our last slide. So thank you so much for being here. If you're live and you want to throw a question in the chat, feel free. But of course, if you are watching this recorded and you have any questions, you can reach out to our office at diversity@pitt.edu or Title IX coordinator at pitt.edu. And we will be happy to answer any questions or concerns that you may have, or provide any resources that we can.
Or advice. If you are concerned about getting this started, you want to talk more about an individual strategy, we're happy to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here with us.